Love doesn't break first. Ego does. There are moments in life when truth arrives late, uninvited, and a little too loud, not as an apology, not as a clean confession, but as a quiet realization that something precious was damaged over information that never deserved trust in the first place. This is one of those moments. Somewhere right now, someone who once leaned toward you emotionally is sitting with a strange mix of affection, regret, and irritation they can't quite explain without looking in the mirror longer than they'd like. Here's a grounded fact most people avoid admitting. Studies in social psychology show that once someone emotionally commits to a belief about a person, they are more likely to defend that belief, even when evidence proves it wrong. Not because they hate the person, but because reversing their stance feels like publicly admitting poor judgment. In simple terms, it's easier to hold a grudge than to hold yourself accountable. And yes, the human mind would rather protect its pride than its peace. Very efficient, very unfortunate. This is where love gets messy. Because the feelings didn't disappear when the lies were exposed. They just got tangled up with embarrassment, bruised pride, and that awkward moment when someone realizes they treated gold like a rumor. So now you have affection sitting in the same room as resentment, both refusing to leave, both pretending they don't know each other. The suspense isn't whether they still care. They do. The tension is that they care while knowing they were wrong, and that combination creates emotional whiplash. One minute they want to make things right, the next they're irritated at the reminder of how easily they believed nonsense. Love didn't vanish. It got stuck behind their ego, tapping its foot, waiting to be acknowledged. And the humor in all this? People will triple-check a food menu before ordering, but accept life-altering lies about someone they care about without a single follow-up question. Humans are fascinating like that. This is not a story about betrayal alone. It's about what happens when affection survives misinformation, when truth arrives late, and when making things right requires more courage than falling in love ever did. Number 1. They fell in love with a version of you that was distorted by someone else's mouth. What they loved wasn't fully you. It was you filtered through someone else's bias, insecurity, jealousy, or agenda. That doesn't make their feelings fake, but it does mean their foundation was unstable from the start. When information about a person is handed down instead of experienced firsthand, the mind fills in gaps with assumptions. Those assumptions slowly become emotional facts, even when they're wrong. So the attachment grows, but it grows crooked. They connected to a narrative, a version of you shaped by tone, timing, exaggeration, and omission. Small details were likely twisted into character flaws, silence was framed as intention, and boundaries were repackaged as arrogance or secrecy. Over time, they didn't realize they were reacting to a story instead of a human being. And once emotions attach, the brain stops double-checking the source. Love makes people careless with verification. This is why the grudge exists now. Not because you did something unforgivable, but because the truth shattered the image they defended. They invested emotionally in a false version of events, and walking that back feels humiliating. It's uncomfortable to admit you loved someone while simultaneously misunderstanding them. It makes people feel foolish, exposed, and easily influenced. There's also grief involved. They're mourning the version of the relationship they thought they had. Even if it never truly existed, it felt real to them. Letting go of that illusion hurts, and instead of placing that hurt where it belongs, on the lies or on their lack of discernment, it often lands on you as resentment. What complicates everything is that when they finally see you clearly, the feelings don't disappear. In fact, they often deepen. Now they're stuck, loving the real you, while carrying regret for how they treated you based on misinformation. That internal conflict turns into tension, distance, or passive anger. So yes, they want to make it right. But first, they have to accept that what they fell for wasn't fully you. And admitting that means admitting they allowed someone else to think for them. Number 2, the grudge isn't against you. It's against their own embarrassment. Most people don't realize that when someone holds a grudge, it's rarely directed purely at the other person. What fuels their anger is the awkward, burning feeling of embarrassment inside themselves. They believed lies, acted on assumptions, and defended positions that now look completely unjustified. Their pride took a hit, and their sense of judgment feels exposed. That internal discomfort has to land somewhere, so it often lands on you. You become the target, not because you caused the original problem, but because you're the visible reminder of their misstep. Embarrassment is powerful because it's wrapped in self-judgment. They replay moments where they doubted you, repeated misinformation to others, or let feelings guide them without verification. Each replay stings, and each sting demands an emotional response. That response is what looks like a grudge, but underneath it is shame, guilt, and a quiet but relentless self-rebuke. They might talk tough, act distant, or even lash out, but the truth is they're wrestling with themselves more than with you. The grudge is a shield. Acting resentful gives them a sense of control over a situation that made them feel foolish. By projecting anger onto you, they can convince themselves they're justified, that the problem isn't their misjudgment, but your actions. It's a clever, though flawed, mental shortcut. They are trying to protect their ego while navigating feelings they don't fully understand. What makes this even more complicated is that love is still involved. They don't stop caring just because embarrassment exists. That mix of affection and shame becomes messy, confusing, and hard to navigate. They might want to make amends, but struggle because admitting the truth of their embarrassment would mean exposing themselves fully, something humans rarely do without fear. Ultimately, the grudge is not a reflection of your worth or mistakes. It's a mirror of how uncomfortable they are confronting their own misjudgment. Understanding this shifts the dynamic entirely. You realize they're battling themselves, and every harsh word or cold shoulder is an echo of internal struggle rather than a verdict on you. Number 3. They defended the lies because admitting the truth would collapse their pride. One of the hardest things for someone to do is admit they were wrong about something that mattered deeply to them, especially when emotions were involved. Pride isn't just arrogance, it's a psychological safety net. When someone falls for lies about a person they care about, their mind doesn't immediately hit error. Instead, it doubles down. Defending the false narrative becomes a way to protect the version of themselves that made the right decision at the time. To admit the truth would feel like stepping into an invisible pit of humiliation. The thing is, defending a lie isn't about hatred or malice. It's about self-preservation. Their ego builds walls around their actions, creating stories that justify why they doubted, why they believed, why they reacted the way they did. Each justification keeps them from facing the uncomfortable reality that they misjudged someone they loved, someone who didn't deserve the doubt. Letting go of that wall means exposing vulnerability they weren't ready to show. Pride is tricky because it disguises itself as righteousness. They can genuinely believe they were protecting themselves, protecting you, or even protecting the truth as they saw it. Meanwhile, every defensive action, every lingering grudge, is a symptom of internal conflict, a battle between their ego and their heart. Their heart knows they were wrong, but the ego refuses to kneel. This tension creates a strange emotional cocktail, guilt, affection, frustration, and fear all mixed together. It's exhausting for them and confusing for you. They might try to reconcile, but their pride slows the process. They can't just apologize. They have to first convince themselves that doing so won't make them look weak or foolish. Ultimately, the grudge is a byproduct of this ego trap. They're stuck between wanting to make it right and fearing the collapse of the self-image they've protected for so long. Understanding this makes their behavior less personal and more human. It's not a judgment on your worth. It's the evidence of how complex and fragile human pride can be when it clashes with love and truth. Number 4. Their anger is the aftermath of loving you without knowing you. There's a strange kind of pain in realizing that someone loved a version of you that never truly existed. Their emotions weren't misplaced. They were real, intense, and genuine. But the object of that love was a story shaped by half-truths, gossip, and misunderstanding. When they finally confront the reality, the love they felt collides violently with the lies they believed. That collision doesn't create peace. It sparks anger, frustration, and a deep, lingering sense of betrayal, not toward you, but toward the situation they allowed themselves to fall into. This anger is not random. It's the aftermath of emotional investment built on shaky ground. They trusted information instead of experience, leaned into stories instead of seeing your actions, and let perception guide their heart. And now, when truth arrives, their mind scrambles to reconcile feelings that were never fully informed with a reality they can't ignore. The result is confusion masquerading as resentment. It's also a reflection of self-betrayal. They allowed themselves to feel so deeply, yet they feel foolish for being misled. Loving someone without knowing them fully is like planting a tree in rocky soil. It grows, but it struggles, bends, and sometimes breaks under its own weight. The frustration they express isn't hatred toward you. It's disappointment in how easily they were influenced and in the time they lost defending assumptions instead of understanding reality. And yet, love remains. Even amid the grudge, the affection persists, tangled with guilt and irritation. That mixture is uncomfortable, raw, and hard to navigate for both sides. They might want to make amends, but anger complicates the path, making every interaction a test of patience and humility. This kind of anger is rooted in realization, not rejection. It's proof that their heart was involved all along, even if their judgment wasn't. Understanding this shifts the perspective entirely. What appears as hostility is actually a human struggle with the consequences of loving blindly, and the first step to healing is acknowledging that love never disappeared. It simply became complicated by truth. Number 5. They want to make it right, but only if it doesn't expose them. There's a delicate, almost invisible line that people walk when they want to fix a situation without fully owning their role in it. In this case, someone in love with you feels the weight of past lies and misjudgments, and part of them desperately wants to make amends. But another part, often the louder, more stubborn part, is terrified of exposure. They want reconciliation, but they want it on their terms, a version of making it right that doesn't require showing the cracks in their armor. This creates tension because their desire for repair collides with their fear of vulnerability. To truly fix things, they would need to admit mistakes, confront embarrassment, and lay bare the ways they allowed misinformation to shape their feelings and actions. That's not easy. It's humiliating, and for many, admitting wrongs in love feels like a loss of dignity, even though the real dignity lies in owning the truth. So instead, they tiptoe around the edges of honesty. They offer gestures, words, or actions meant to soothe without confronting the root. A message, a small apology, a careful act of kindness, all of it is designed to repair the surface while the deeper damage stays untouched. The love is there, yes, but it's caught in a tug-of-war with fear. The result is often frustrating for both sides. You see the effort and feel the sincerity, But the hesitation, the half measures, the invisible walls, they tell a different story. You sense that they are holding back, not because they don't care, but because stepping fully into accountability scares them. That fear is human, but it complicates what should be a simple path toward reconciliation. Understanding this makes the situation clearer. Their grudge, their distance, and their uneven attempts at making things right are not signs that love is gone. They're signs that love exists alongside fear. They want to heal what was broken, but they are still negotiating with themselves on how much of their ego, pride, and embarrassment they're willing to risk. And until they make that leap, the repair will always feel partial, unfinished, and tense. Number 6. They're carrying guilt, not just feelings. What most people miss when someone holds a grudge in love is that beneath the surface, guilt is often the true driver. It's easy to assume anger or resentment is aimed at you, but in reality, the weight they carry is mostly directed inward. They know deep down that they judged you unfairly, believed lies about you, or acted on assumptions without proof. That awareness doesn't just sit quietly. It gnaws, twists, and fuels every frustrated thought and distant gesture. Guilt is complicated because it rarely stays in one place. It seeps into behavior, coloring interactions with tension, awkwardness, or defensive energy. They want to express remorse, to bridge the gap between what was and what should have been, but guilt makes even simple communication feel loaded. Every word they choose becomes a negotiation between admitting their fault and protecting their pride. That push and pull is exhausting, and it often shows up as a grudge. The tricky part is that guilt and love are tangled together. They still care, still want connection, still hope to make things right. But the guilt amplifies fear. Fear of being rejected, fear of showing weakness, fear of reopening a wound they caused. Their mind remembers how they treated you based on lies, and their heart remembers how much they actually loved you, despite the misinformation. This internal conflict is heavy, and it often manifests as impatience, irritability, or emotional distance. Guilt also carries a strange sort of reverence for the truth. They respect what they did wrong, and that respect makes it harder to pretend everything is fine. They want to fix things, but they can't just erase the past or the choices they made. Every effort to repair the bond is shadowed by awareness that part of the damage came from them believing and acting on falsehoods. Understanding this changes the lens completely. The grudge isn't a sign that love has died or that they are cold. It's proof that they are human, aware, and wrestling with the consequences of their misjudgment. What you see as distance is often their way of carrying guilt while trying to figure out how to honor both the truth and the love that still exists. Number 7. They are haunted by how easily they turned against you. There's a quiet kind of torment that comes when someone realizes how quickly they doubted the person they loved. They believed lies, repeated assumptions, or accepted narratives about you without hesitation. And now that truth has emerged, the memory of their own readiness to judge stings like a wound that never fully heals. This haunting isn't loud or dramatic. It's subtle, lingering in the corners of their mind every time they think about what happened, every time they remember how easily they allowed misinformation to dictate their feelings. The haunting comes from self-reflection. They see themselves acting in ways that were unfair, reactive, or even cruel, and the mind refuses to let go. They replay conversations, decisions, and moments where their emotions were manipulated by lies, and each replay deepens the discomfort. They're not only upset with themselves, they're unsettled because they realize the speed at which they abandoned discernment, the carelessness with which they judged someone they truly cared about. It's a bitter realization. Love should feel grounding, but in this case, it became a source of self-reproach. This awareness creates a tension that's hard to explain to anyone else. They still have love for you, yet every affectionate thought comes with an echo of guilt and shame. They're torn between wanting to make amends and fearing that any move might not fully undo the damage caused by their initial judgment. That internal conflict amplifies the grudge. They are, in a sense, punishing themselves by keeping distance or showing coldness, as if enduring the discomfort is a way to atone. The haunting also changes the way they approach you now. They tread lightly, speak carefully, and overanalyze every reaction because they fear repeating past mistakes. What you see as hesitation or frustration is actually the nervous energy of someone learning, the cautiousness of someone who once moved too fast in doubt. Ultimately, their haunting is proof of awareness and growth. They are not indifferent. They are conscious of the cost of their actions and of how fragile trust can be. Their grudge is less about holding on to anger and more about the weight of knowing they once turned against the one they loved the most. Number 8. They're afraid you'll see them the way they once saw you. One of the most complicated layers in love wounded by lies is fear. Specifically, the fear of being judged the way they once judged you. They remember the moments they doubted you, believed misinformation, or allowed gossip and assumptions to shape their perception, and now that memory sits heavy in their chest. They are painfully aware of how unfair or careless they were, and the thought of you seeing them through that lens fills them with anxiety. This fear doesn't erase love. It distorts it, creating a tension between wanting closeness and fearing exposure. They worry that reconciliation won't just be about making things right. It will also force them to confront the versions of themselves that acted recklessly. They fear the judgment they themselves imposed on you might now be turned back on them. That awareness is brutal because it strips away the simplicity of "I love you" and replaces it with complicated calculations. How to repair without revealing all the shame, how to reconnect without reliving past mistakes. Their love is genuine, but it's wrapped in hesitation, protective walls, and careful navigation of their own vulnerability. This fear explains much of the lingering grudge. What looks like distance, irritation, or emotional coldness is often them tiptoeing around their own embarrassment. They don't want to reopen wounds, yet they are acutely aware that past behavior could easily hurt the bond again if they misstep. Every word, gesture, or attempt at reconciliation carries an internal audit. Is this safe? Am I exposing the part of myself I regret most? Yet this fear also shows something remarkable. It demonstrates self-awareness and accountability, even if imperfectly expressed. They know they were flawed in their judgment, and they fear repeating the same errors. The grudge is not about hatred or rejection. It's about caution, about learning from the past, and about protecting the fragile bridge between their love and their shame. Ultimately, they want you to see the real them, but they're terrified that the real them is the same person who once judged you unjustly. Love persists, but so does the shadow of fear, quietly shaping every attempt to make things right. Number 9. The grudge exists because apology requires humility. They haven't mastered yet. Apologizing is deceptively simple in words, but enormously complex in practice, especially when love and ego collide. The person who once believed lies about you knows, deep down, that they were wrong. They understand the unfairness of their judgment, the harm their assumptions caused, and the emotional distance they created. Yet offering a genuine apology demands a kind of humility that most people aren't trained to access. It's not just saying, "I'm sorry." It's fully acknowledging your mistakes, owning the discomfort you caused, and opening yourself to vulnerability without expecting immediate forgiveness. That level of humility is uncomfortable, unfamiliar, and for many, frightening. Because they haven't mastered this humility yet, the grudge lingers. Holding on to resentment becomes a protective mechanism. By maintaining a small wall of defensiveness, they avoid confronting the aspects of themselves that acted thoughtlessly or unfairly. It's easier to let frustration linger, to replay perceived slights or cling to residual anger, than to risk the emotional exposure required to apologize fully. That grudge is less about you and more about the gap between their current emotional state and the courage needed to admit fault honestly. The irony is that love often persists even through this hesitation. Their feelings haven't disappeared. They're trapped in the tension between caring deeply for you and fearing the humility that true reconciliation demands. Every attempt at connection feels half-formed because their heart wants closeness, but their ego refuses to be fully transparent. Until they bridge that gap, interactions will carry subtle friction. A word said too sharply, a delayed response, a quiet defensiveness that betrays their internal struggle. This dynamic makes the grudge feel impenetrable, but understanding it reframes everything. The frustration, the coldness, the distance, they're not evidence that love is gone. They are evidence that the person is wrestling with their own limitations, learning that humility in love isn't optional, it's essential. The grudge exists not because they stopped caring, but because they are still growing into the courage to show it in the way you truly deserve. Number 10. They love you, but they hate the version of themselves the situation revealed. One of the most complicated truths about love entangled with lies is that the person who cares for you often ends up resenting themselves more than they resent anyone else. They see clearly now how quickly they were swayed, how easily they believed the wrong story, and how carelessly they allowed misinformation to dictate their actions. That reflection creates a sharp, uncomfortable self-awareness. They love you deeply, but every time they look at their own past behavior, they feel frustrated, ashamed, and in some ways angry at themselves for failing the one person they truly cared about. This inner conflict fuels the grudge. It isn't about doubting your character or withdrawing affection. It's about wrestling with their own mistakes and the gap between who they want to be and who they acted as. They remember their misjudgments vividly, the words said, the moments of doubt, the assumptions they made, and those memories sting. That version of themselves, one that acted without clarity or fairness, becomes an enemy they can't ignore. The struggle is subtle but powerful. Every attempt to reconcile is shadowed by the discomfort of seeing the person they once were reflected back at them. They want to bridge the gap with you, to make amends and restore connection, but doing so requires acknowledging the parts of themselves they despise. That is exhausting, and often easier to process through frustration, defensiveness, or a lingering grudge than through immediate, full transparency. Love remains at the core, but it is complicated by self-judgment. They are navigating two powerful currents, the desire to care for you and the discomfort of confronting their own flaws in how they handled the situation. Every step toward reconciliation becomes a negotiation with themselves, balancing vulnerability with the fear of reliving the embarrassment of their past actions. Understanding this changes everything. The grudge isn't a reflection of diminished love. It's proof that love exists alongside self-awareness and accountability. They are not angry at you. They are struggling with the version of themselves that hurt someone they could not afford to lose. And that tension makes their journey toward making things right both fragile and deeply human. Number 11. They're waiting for a moment that lets them fix things without fully confessing. When someone loves you but has been misled, there's often a quiet hesitation in their attempts to make things right. They want reconciliation, but they're waiting for the perfect moment, a time when the emotional stakes feel safer, when the risk of vulnerability feels manageable, and when they can repair the relationship without fully exposing the ways they were wrong. It's not that they don't care, it's that confession and accountability are heavy, and most people naturally avoid carrying that weight all at once. This waiting creates tension. Every gesture, every attempt at contact, is measured against an internal checklist. Is this the right time? Will this hurt less? Can I show I care without revealing how foolish I was? They long for a moment when they can bridge the gap between the truth and love without facing the full impact of their mistakes. Until that moment comes, the grudge lingers, because unresolved guilt, fear, and pride remain quietly lodged inside them. What makes it more complicated is that their intentions are genuine. They want to make amends and rebuild trust, but their timing is cautious. They are negotiating with themselves, balancing the desire to reconnect against the fear of reopening wounds or confronting embarrassment. The longer they wait, the more the grudge can feel like distance or coldness, even though underneath, the desire to repair remains alive. This is why reconciliation often feels incomplete at first. They may express care, make small gestures, or attempt conversations that skirt the heart of the issue. Their love is there, but it's entangled with the anxiety of facing the full truth. They hope for a window that allows them to act without risking everything, without exposing the fragility their misjudgment revealed. Understanding this reveals the humanity behind their grudge. It's not apathy or cruelty, it's caution, fear, and the natural instinct to protect oneself while still caring deeply. They're caught in a delicate balance, wanting to fix what's broken, but hesitant to reveal how deeply they once failed. Their grudge is a reflection of that internal struggle, a pause before the leap toward honesty, love, and genuine reconciliation. Number 12. Their heart knows the truth. Their ego is still negotiating. When someone loves you but has been caught in lies, there's a powerful tension between what they feel and what they allow themselves to express. Deep down, their heart has already recognized the truth. You were never the person those stories painted you to be. Their emotions, the connection they felt, and the bond they've built all point to the reality of who you are. Yet their ego, stubborn and protective, hasn't fully caught up. It's negotiating, debating, and hesitating, trying to protect pride, avoid embarrassment, and preserve the version of themselves that acted decisively when they first believed the false narrative. This negotiation is what fuels the grudge. Their love hasn't disappeared. It's alive and vibrant, but it's weighed down by the friction of self-consciousness. Every time they interact with you, part of them wants to bridge the gap, to show understanding, and to make things right. At the same time, another part hesitates, holding back words, gestures, or actions that might reveal the depth of their misjudgment. That friction can look like frustration, coldness, or hesitation from the outside, but inside, it's a struggle between truth and ego, between vulnerability and self-preservation. The ego doesn't want to admit fault easily. It resists the humility required to fully embrace the truth, even when the heart has already moved on. The result is a slow, careful process where love exists alongside caution, where every step toward reconciliation is measured against fear of exposure and shame. It's not indifference, it's the human instinct to negotiate emotional safety while still honoring genuine feelings. Understanding this changes the perception entirely. The grudge isn't proof of fading love, it's evidence of internal conflict. They're living in two worlds at once, one where they know the truth about you and one where they're still reconciling with how they got it wrong. Their heart points them toward healing, toward repair, and toward authenticity, but their ego is still learning how to surrender. Recognizing this tension explains why the path to reconciliation is uneven, why gestures feel hesitant, and why patience is often the bridge between love restrained by ego and love fully expressed. Number 13. They didn't lose you. They lost control of the narrative. One of the hardest truths for someone to face is that the grudge they hold often comes from losing control, not losing love. They believed stories, accepted lies, and let assumptions shape their perception of you. In doing so, they became invested in a version of events they could manage, a narrative they could defend. They thought they were in control of how the story unfolded, how they saw you, how others saw you, and how their relationship with you developed. When the truth emerged, that sense of control evaporated. The narrative they clung to crumbled, leaving them feeling powerless, exposed, and, yes, resentful. This is why the grudge is so persistent. It's less about hating you and more about grappling with the dissonance between the story they believed and the reality in front of them. They're haunted by the fact that they were operating in a world of illusion, making choices and forming judgments as if they understood the truth, only to discover that the truth had been quietly moving around them all along. That loss of control is unsettling. Humans are wired to resist vulnerability, and when the rug is pulled out from under their carefully constructed perceptions, discomfort often masquerades as anger. Even though they still care, their love is tangled with the frustration of realizing they can't dictate the story anymore. Every effort to reconcile is colored by caution, because they're navigating not just the truth about you, but the truth about how easily they allowed themselves to be misled. They want to fix the relationship, but the uncertainty of the narrative, the fact that they no longer have the power to frame it in their favor, creates tension. This perspective reframes their behavior entirely. The grudge is not a reflection of fading love, indifference, or cruelty. It's a response to losing control over a story they invested in emotionally, a story that gave them a sense of security and understanding. Once they accept that the narrative is no longer theirs to manipulate, once they surrender the need for control, the path toward honesty, repair, and genuine connection becomes clearer. The grudge fades, not because love disappears, but because the struggle to reclaim control finally ends. Number 14. Making it right means facing the damage, not just reopening contact. Love isn't repaired by words alone, gestures alone, or even by showing up after a long silence. True reconciliation demands something far deeper, facing the damage that was done. Someone who loves you but has been misled might want to reconnect quickly, hoping a conversation, a message, or a smile can erase the hurt. But the real work lies in acknowledging the full impact of their actions and the lies they believed. Every word they spoke, every judgment they made, and every assumption they acted on created ripples, and those ripples affect more than feelings. They shape trust, security, and the foundation of the relationship. Reopening contact without addressing the damage is like painting over cracks in a wall. It might look whole for a moment, but underneath, the structural weaknesses remain. They have to confront the moments where they doubted you unfairly, the times they let misinformation dictate their actions, and the ways those actions may have wounded you. That confrontation isn't easy. It requires humility, courage, and honesty, all of which can feel threatening to the ego. Yet it is the only way to bridge the gap between love that remains and the pain that lingers. Facing the damage also means listening without defense. It's about hearing how their mistakes impacted you, accepting it fully, and resisting the urge to justify past actions. They must step into the discomfort and resist the temptation to minimize what happened. Only then can repair be genuine. Only then can love move from complicated tension into clarity, trust, and deeper connection. This process transforms a grudge into growth. It shifts the focus from blame and avoidance to understanding and accountability. Love remains intact, but it becomes tempered with respect, awareness, and maturity. What seems like a challenge is actually an opportunity, the chance to rebuild not just a connection, but a bond that is stronger because it has survived honesty and truth. Making it right isn't about reopening old wounds lightly. It's about stepping fully into responsibility, facing the damage head-on, and proving that love can endure not just feelings, but the consequences of misunderstanding, lies, and human imperfection. Conclusion. What we've uncovered is that love isn't simple, and healing isn't a straight line. When someone in love holds a grudge over lies, it's rarely about you. It's about pride, embarrassment, fear, and the struggle to reconcile who they were with, who they know you truly are. They fell for a version of you distorted by false stories, and now they're wrestling with guilt, shame, and the fear of exposing their mistakes. Every grudge, hesitation, or cold shoulder is a reflection of internal conflict, a battle between the heart that knows the truth and the ego that still hesitates. Making things right requires courage, humility, and honesty. It's about facing the damage, owning misjudgments, and stepping into vulnerability without shortcuts. Love alone isn't enough. It must meet accountability, self-reflection, and the willingness to repair what was broken. The truth is messy, but within that mess lies growth, deeper connection, and the chance for a love that isn't just felt, but proven through action. At the core, this is a human story. It's about the struggle to love correctly, the struggle to forgive ourselves for failing, and the struggle to rebuild bonds stronger than misinformation, ego, or pride. Understanding these layers changes the way we see grudges. They aren't walls against us. They're mirrors reflecting the human struggle to align heart, mind, and action. When both sides step into truth, the path from tension to trust becomes clear, and love not only survives, it thrives. If this resonated with you, don't forget to hit that subscribe button for more deep insights. Share your thoughts in the comments, like this video if it gave you clarity, and share it with someone who needs to hear the truth about love, trust, and human complexity. Let's grow, learn, and uncover these truths together. Stay awakened, chosen ones.